Okay, I believe tonight's guest is the first in our history to have a medical condition named after him. We'll talk about that in a second. But Michael Shermer is the publisher of Skeptic Magazine, a presidential fellow at Chapman University, the host of the popular podcast, The Michael Shermer Show, and the Skeptic Substack Weekly columnist. He's the author of many New York Times best-selling books, including Why People Believe Weird Things, Pseudoscience, Superstition, and Other Confusions of Our Time, The Believing Brain, From Ghosts and Gods to Politics and Conspiracies, How We Construct Beliefs and Reinforce Them as Truths, and The Moral Arc, How Science Makes Us Better People. He has appeared virtually everywhere, from The Colbert Report to Oprah to most recently Joe Rogan's show. So please welcome Michael Shermer.
All right, hi everybody.
I have to say that I knew Michael years before he became well known in this through endurance cycling. I have to add that he's a 5-time finisher of the Race Across America, including a runner-up finish. Correct?
Well, technically, I finished 3 of the 5.
Okay.
Two were DNF due to medical and other conditions, including the Shermer neck, which is when your neck muscles collapse from overuse. And I was the first victim of that. Now, about 20% of the riders experience Shermer neck. And so it was much to my surprise that I got a medical condition named after me. That probably be the only thing I'm remembered for a century from now. Oh yeah, like Dr. Alzheimer.
Well, I talk to a lot of Ram riders now, and they know you're a legend in their minds. But you're also a legend in this field. But I have to share this photo of you.
Yes.
This is from his website,
Yes.
Michael, back in the day.
Back when I was young.
Yes. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, Michael, first, and then we'll go on, and you can go ahead and into your talk. How did you make this your life's work?
Well, Skeptic, we started in my garage in 1992 with my partner, Pat Lindsay, who I had just recently met, and we shared interest in skepticism. Mm-hmm. And there was a kind of a nascent skeptical movement that started in the 70s, 1976 technically, with a group of scientists and magicians and others who were concerned about Uri Geller and other mediums and psychics, the New Age movement and astrology and Bigfoot and UFOs and all this stuff. And Carl Sagan was one of those, and of course he was interested in extraterrestrials, but then that it connects with UFOs and so on. And it by the early 90s there was a pretty strong movement, a demand in the public and media for explanations for the paranormal, the supernatural, and so on. So I just started Skeptic, and it's got it in bookstores, and hopefully you carry it here. I forgot to ask if you carry Skeptic.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Oh, it's good. Yeah, good. Yeah, we're in pretty much every bookstore in North America. And, there's just a demand for information that scientists don't necessarily know. Like, what's the explanation for UAPs and UFOs? Most scientists, this is not what they do. They don't study that. Mm-hmm. Or I remember seeing some evolutionary biologists debate creationists. And, they did terrible because they didn't know what the arguments were. And they think, well, I'll just prove evolution and that'll be the end of it. It's not about evolution. Creationism is about something else. And they have specific strategies they use to try to cast doubt on the mainstream theory in order to promote their own without actually promoting their own, because they don't have any evidence. And same thing with Holocaust denial. I saw Holocaust historians unable to answer the arguments of Holocaust deniers because it's not really about proving the Holocaust, it's about something else. So really what we do is kind of a niche market for providing explanations for these claims that people make. And conspiracies were always treated in the media and in academia and among social scientists as kind of a fringe belief system that's not that important. But it's become clear now that it's pretty mainstream, actually. It's always been mainstream. There's always been conspiracy theories in the United States since the beginning of the country. Every election gets contested as the other side, the winning side, somehow cheated. So as they say, political science, conspiracy theories are for losers. The losing party says the other one cheated. And then they usually drop it and then go on to the next election or whatever. What's different at this time, Trump and his followers continue the conspiracy theory. They even had a conspiracy theory after they won in 2016, to try to promote that they got more of the popular vote. Anyway, so, but Watergate, that was conspiracy theories, right? Iran-Contra. And all the things the CIA and the FBI were doing in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that we didn't find out about until the 90s. And those are conspiracy theories that turn out to be true conspiracies. For example, rigging elections in third world countries to favor the fascist dictator over the communist dictator, because at least they'll be friendlier to U.S. business interests in those countries. And, rigging elections, trying to assassinate foreign leaders. The COINTELPRO was a program by the FBI to infiltrate social activist groups in the United States, particularly in the 60s and 70s, to make them look bad, to spy on them, and so on. The Black Panthers, American Indian Movement, feminist groups, and so on. J. Edgar Hoover orchestrated this program without congressional approval or even knowledge. I mean, often the president didn't even know that they were doing these things. Warrantless wiretaps, spying on American citizens without a judge approval. This is illegal.
Yeah.
And our own government was doing it. So, when you have somebody nutty like Alex Jones, it's false flag operation, it's inside job. Of course, he's crazy about 9/11 or Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
But the principle is not completely irrational. That there are reasons to suspect governments for conspiring against their own citizens, including our government. Right? MK Ultra was a program that came out in the 90s about what the CIA was doing for brainwashing and mind control using LSD and other psychoactive drugs that they were doing to American citizens without their consent, without their knowledge, without anybody knowing. It was the FBI that sent Martin Luther King Jr. that letter suggesting he kill himself because if they were basically blackmailing him, they said, we taped your sex capades with these women in these hotels, and we're going to release these tapes if you don't take yourself out, essentially, in so many words. That was J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI. Our government did that, right? So this is why the rational believe the irrational. It's not irrational to think governments do these things, including our own government. So this is my argument about constructive conspiracism. There's kind of a logic to assuming the worst just in case, because sometimes the worst is real. But as they say, even if you're paranoid, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you.
Yeah.
All right.
Interesting. Before we actually talk about the book, I just want to know, this is your life's work, obviously, and you have a reputable publisher in Johns Hopkins University. I mean, so it's going a bit more into the mainstream, wouldn't you think?
I think so. I hope so.
Skeptics.
Yes, I'm hoping to convince people it's not, the people promoting conspiracy theories are not just these wackadoodle weirdos in their basements tweeting. It's mainstream. It's everywhere.
So as far as this book, if you can explain, tell us, what to expect when we read your book, and all of us will read your book. So.
Well, so yes, it's a university press. I went with the university press because I wanted to be taken seriously amongst people that study conspiracy theories. I mean, there's a growing body of scientists, social scientists, psychologists, political scientists, anthropologists, and so on who study this, not just media people who cover it, specific conspiracy theories, but a scholarship for who believes and why did they believe, and conducting massive survey studies on these things, which I did as well. I had a couple of my ex-grad students are now professors that do statistics and survey research, and so we conducted our own survey and paid a lot of money to a company that collects data and so on. And so anyway, but there's a lot of data on this. So it's like, who's more likely to believe conspiracies, liberals or conservatives? Well, both. Depends on the conspiracy theory, right? So it's not that one is more conspiratorially minded or more paranoid than the other, or race, for example, is not a predictor of who's more likely to be conspiratorial, but it does predict which conspiracies. So African Americans are more likely to be suspicious of the government planting crack cocaine and CIA inner cities involved in trying to ruin black communities. The Tuskegee experiment was real. This U.S. medical agency withholding treatment for syphilis, these African American men in Tuskegee, when they could have been treated without their consent, without their knowledge. It's totally illegal, not to mention immoral, and our own government did this, right? So no wonder African Americans are a little more vaccine hesitant than other groups. White Americans are more likely to think the government's conspiring to take away our guns, cancel the Second Amendment. They're building FEMA camps in Texas to lock up Americans with guns, right? And education attenuates conspiracism somewhat. People with a graduate degree in college are half as likely to believe conspiracy theories as high school grads, for example. People only with a high school diploma. But it's still 20% across the board on average that people with graduate degrees believe conspiracy theories. That's 1 in 5. So it's not like this is some super fringy thing, again. And it's not like being highly educated and intelligent inoculates you against conspiracism. In fact, sometimes do the opposite, because I argued this in my first book. Why do smart people believe weird things? Because they're really good at rationalizing beliefs they hold for non-smart reasons. And the same would be here. If you talk to a flat earther, these aren't dumb people. I mean, they have a coherent set of arguments. They're wrong, but in their mind, I mean, they can give you a set of arguments. These intelligent design creationists, they're fairly technical. You really got to really read the literature carefully to understand what they're arguing. It's not dumb. It's not just, well, God told me, so I believe it. It's not like that at all. They'll go into the fine-tuning of the cosmos and the relationship between the gravity and the electromagnetism and the DNA and where it came from RNA and the structure of the eye. They have these detailed arguments. They're smart people. And most conspiracy theories are like that, again, except for the current, the previous conspiracist in chief in the White House, who just had one word conspiracy theories, rigged, or Hillary, and everybody knows what that means, and he doesn't even bother to try to make a set of arguments. His argument is just, well, people are saying. That's it. That's the extent of the full argument. So that's also unusual. So anyway, that's the.
Why is it? It just seemed that so much more prolific now. Is it because social media, or it's just out there more than it was in the past? We tended in the past, if you're a person of a certain age, you tended to believe things and believe in the government and believe in things without questioning so much. However, now it seems like it's gone rampant.
Yeah, it does. There's a bit of an availability heuristic or bias there, where what's covered a lot comes to mind as it seems more prominent than it used to be. But that's just our memories. Conspiracy theories have always been part of American politics.
Okay.
There's no more conspiracy theories now than there's ever been. There's always been conspiracisms. A couple of political scientists did a study of letters to the editor to the New York Times for a century. So they had tens of thousands of letters, and then they did a content, sort of sorted them by content, had different people reading them. There's these algorithms you can run through computers that look for keywords. Anyway, so they narrowed it down. Okay, how many? It was like 10% of the letters were all about conspiracy theories, all the way back to the 1890s. The Mormons are doing this, the Jews are doing that, the Catholics are up to no good. This kind of stuff about just about elections, political elections. So there's no more of them now. What's different with social media is the speed with which they can be spread instantly, overnight. You get millions of people embrace these. I mean, Alex Jones was on the radio, like within minutes of Sandy Hook, and within an hour or two, he had a whole conspiracy theory going. This has the fingerprints of the CIA all over it, or the FBI, or whoever it was, and he can reach so many people. That I don't know what his followership is now, but it was like tens of millions. That's a lot. That's like Rush Limbaugh size audience. and it's just pure conspiracies. So you can reach more people more quickly because of the internet. But on the other hand, we can counter the bogus conspiracy theories instantly in real time, which we do. You know, here's the argument. Here's why it's wrong, and you just use social media as a counter to that. So I'm always leery about social media is bad, it's evil, because they said that about the printing press or anything, the telephone, television, radio. There were always people say, oh, this is going to be bad because people can spread propaganda. Well, yeah, that's right, they can, but they can also spread good information, right?
I got to ask, how are you able to keep the faith and keep the fight going in terms of getting, you know?
Well, in part, it's my day job, so it's what I do.
But still.
And also, I am fairly optimistic that despite all the crazy ideas that people hold and that are out there in the ether, you know, if you just take the big picture of how far we've come in 500 years, let's say, I mean, almost nobody believes in witches anymore. I mean, the witch crazes were driven by a conspiracy theory that Satan is cavorting with women in the middle of the night, and that explains the plague, or the starvation, or so-and-so's cow died, or the disastrous weather event, or, you know, the witch theory of causality is what pretty much everybody believed in early modern Europe. And now pretty much nobody in the Western world believes that. Well, why? Because we have science. We have meteorology. We have epidemiology. We have the germ theory of disease. You know.
Can I follow up with it?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Do you think that the difference now than 100 years ago is? Do you think it's becoming institutionalized? Conspiracy theory? I mean, it's rampant in government now.
Yes. Institutionalized in a way because, again, there's a kind of rationality to it, of being leery of what the media or government is saying, because the media does get it wrong occasionally. You know, and now people on the right will say, "Oh, the Kyle Rittenhouse case or the Covington boys." You know, they have half a dozen ones that the New York Times and CNN trumpeted and turned out to be completely wrong. Even the whole Russian collusion thing turned out to be something of a nothing burger, right? I mean, they did not do what, you know, the Democrats said that they did. That was a conspiracy theory, turned out to be false. Now, they were manipulating social media and all that, yes, but that's different than rigging the election against the Republicans. They didn't against against Hillary and so on. They didn't do that, right? So that, in a way, but again, it's always been institutionalized. I mean, what is a conspiracy? You know, 9/11 was an inside job. No, but it was a conspiracy. 19 members of Al-Qaeda plotting to fly planes into buildings, that's a conspiracy. They did that. So the theory, the government's theory that it was Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden did it, that's the correct theory. The counter theory that it was an inside job or somehow Bush knew it, let it happen on purpose, LIHOP, or made it happen on purpose, MIHOP. These are the two terms that 9/11 truthers came up with. But really, even that's an old idea. You know, when Rome burned, Nero was blamed. Oh, Nero knew, he let it happen on purpose, or he made it happen on purpose, right? There were conspiracy theories about that when after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Within weeks, there were congressional investigations and committees set up to figure out how did this happen. You know, who dropped the ball? What was the problem? You know, and then it wasn't long before, well, maybe Roosevelt was in on it. He knew it was going to happen. He let it happen on purpose. Made it happen on purpose, and because he did want to get the United States into the Second World War, he did want to support England against Nazi Germany. He couldn't. Congress was not supporting it. There was a large vocal America Firster movement, like MAGA, but this was led by Charles Lindbergh, who was a national hero. And after the disaster of the First World War, you know, Americans said, no more of that. We're not going. Let's not do that again. That was a terrible idea. So that's what. So then Pearl Harbor happens, and Roosevelt's like, now we can do it. So I call that cowhop, capitalized on what happened on purpose. Right? Because that's what that's the real conspiracy, as it were. Because that's what politicians always do that, right? So it's not that Bush knew that 9/11 was going to happen, he let it happen, or made it happen, but he sure capitalized on it, right? To do what he ended up doing, which was, you know, not such a great idea. Invading maybe Afghanistan, maybe, but Iraq, terrible idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and all politicians do that. So I wouldn't blame the left or the right on that. And Obama kept it going. You know, 8 years he didn't end the war. He didn't close Gitmo. He didn't pull the troops out. He didn't end warrantless wiretapping, as we learned from WikiLeaks. In fact, they were spying on his administration, spying on American citizens without a court order. That's illegal. You know, how is it? Okay, so again, when people go, I don't trust the government. Well, for good reason. I understand.
I have a question. Feel free to jump in at any time, but regarding like the Boston Marathon bomber, and they wrongly, Reddit citizen journalists wrongly accused a Rutgers student who actually had committed suicide prior to the bombing as the actual bomber. But people really picked up on this and really went with it. And I'm wondering about the mindset, the psychology of that, of picking up on things and going with it, according to you.
We did an issue of Skeptic on the Boston Marathon bombing, because there were conspiracy theories about who was behind the Tsarnaev brothers. Somebody pulled this. They couldn't possibly have pulled this off, right? Well, this is part of it. It's called a proportionality bias. That there's a kind of a cognitive relationship between the size of an effect and the size of the cause. So if I take a little pebble and I kind of heave it like that, it doesn't take much effort, not much cause, and it doesn't go very far. But if I take it and I really heave it, it goes much farther. So there's kind of a folk physics about cause and effect, right? And so there's interesting experiments on this where you give subjects a pair of die and go, okay, try to roll a low number, like a 2 or a 3 or a 4, and they'll go like that. Now try to roll like 11 or 12, and they go like wow, like that. Like this makes no difference at all, of course, but it feels intuitively like the stone throwing thing, right? And then there's research on experiments with just made up conspiracy theories. And the bigger the conspiracy theory is, the more elements people think have to be as the cause. And so now let's take it to real world conspiracy theories. So, that JFK, the leader of the free world, handsome, articulate, powerful, and he's brought down by who? Lee Harvey Oswald, just this total nut job nobody. Jackie called him a little communist. And it's like, that just doesn't feel right. It's like the Holocaust, one of the worst things that ever happened, caused by the Nazis, one of the worst political regimes ever. So that is kind of a cognitive harmony there. Cognitive dissonance, where there's that disproportion. So, like I'll hear from 9/11 truthers, are you telling me that 19 guys with box cutters brought down the World Trade Center building? Come on, impossible, right? It just doesn't. So other people had to be in on it, right? Or Princess Diana, cause of death, drunk driving, speeding, no seatbelt. Tens of thousands of Americans die every year from those causes. But she's a princess, and princesses can't die the way the rest of us plebes do, right? So that'd be the MI6 and MI5 and the royal family and Prince Charles and Prince Philip, and all these people had to be in on it. And I think that goes a long ways, because, so counterfactually, what if Oswald had missed or just wounded Kennedy? Like Hinckley tried to kill Reagan, and he shot him, but he kind of missed, and Reagan survived. There's no big, vast conspiracy industry behind Hinckley. Everybody, he was crazy. He wanted to impress Jodie Foster. What a nut job. Everybody, okay, he's crazy, right? Or Squeaky Fromm, one of Charles Manson's girls, tried to shoot President Ford. He was up in Sacramento and missed. He's at a picnic or something, and but again, it's like, oh, well, she's one of Charles Manson's cultish, nut job, crazy people. Makes perfect sense. There's no CIA behind it, the KGB, the mafia, the Russians, the Cubans, none of that, right? And so that's a nice test case there, right? If it had been the mayor of Dallas who was shot in Dealey Plaza, would anybody care? The local police would have wrapped the case up in a couple of weeks and put him on trial, and that would have been the end of that, right? But because it's a big thing, and it doesn't feel right that it's just some little cause made it happen. But if you think about it, that's the only way it could happen, because in a free society, people that are nobodies are invisible. No one knows who they are. No one tracks them. Although, I mean, the CIA, the FBI knew about Oswald just like they knew about Manson, before they did their deed. But again, that's hindsight bias. They should have known it and stopped them ahead of time. Well, there's a, they have 1,000 people in their files that are kind of goofy and could be dangerous, and you can't just arrest everybody, because then you're going to get innocent people in your net, right? It's like the stop and frisk program in New York City. They caught more criminals for sure, but they caught more innocent people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a signal detection problem. Where do you set the criteria for who we're going to determine is the signal that we're looking for? And like terrorism, so all the airport stuff we all have to go through, they're going to catch more bad people this way, but the rest of us have to suffer, right? More innocent people have to kind of go through that, right? So I think that's a big part of the psychology of it.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to have a question they want to?
What about the January 6th bomber? I've heard nothing on the news. There's no. You'd think that they'd have some kind of evidence.
Which bomber? Do you
leads.
mean the backpacks that were found?
Yeah, the backpacks. Yeah.
I haven't heard. I don't think they ever found who put those.
There's no videos. There's no picture. I mean, they must have tons of videos and such, but
Maybe not. I mean,
and Washington D.C. has the most.
yeah, it
videos,
does. I know, but
there's nothing's been released, and there's no clue as to who it is, at least as far as the news.
Right. Yes, well, again, principal conspiracism I talk about in the book. Never attribute to malice what can be explained by randomness or stupidity or incompetence. That goes a long ways. I mean, when Epstein died, it was like, yeah, okay, killed himself probably. Yeah, that makes sense. And then it's like, well, one of the cameras was out. I'm like, huh, that's weird. Okay, well, that could be chance. And then 2 of the cameras were out. I'm like, okay. 2 is like, if you hear it, you're in your living room, you hear at the door, you think, oh, what was that? If you hear it, you think, that sounds like a knock. I'm going to go check this out, right? And then, so I posted on Twitter, okay, maybe Epstein was murdered, and then somebody wrote me who worked at that prison, and they said, oh, that prison's a piece of shit. Nothing works there. None of the cameras work. The electricity goes out all the time. It's a terrible place. Like, oh, okay. Probably incompetence and randomness instead of a conspiracy. So I think, that's a big part of it.
So the basic, the most fundamental reason why people believe weird things, including conspiracy theory, one of the factors, I think you would agree, is illusion of intentionality, right?
Yes,
So,
correct, yes.
and in a sense, conspiracy theory is a very unfortunate, word, phrase, because conspiracies do exist, and we can have.
Yes,
theories
it's
about it.
become a pejorative. Oh, that's just a crazy conspiracy theory.
But so earlier you were talking about the belief in witches, which still exists in other societies. Well, also in America, but in Africa there are plenty of countries where people believe in witches, and that's clearly intentionality, illusion. Right?
Yes, yes.
So I love the example where someone's roof collapses because of the rain, because it got saturated by water.
Right.
And the anthropologist, one of the evolutionary psychologists who wrote about it, asked the guy, but don't you understand that the roof just became heavier and the foundation was kind of shaky and so it collapsed? And he's like, yeah, I'm not an idiot, of course.
Right.
That's why it collapsed. The question is, why my roof?
Right.
Why not somebody
At
else's?
that time, right.
And
Yes.
so
Yes.
that's the problem. So where I'm going with this is that we don't have to delineate conspiracy theories as sort of a special case of intentionality.
Yes, I agree. Yeah,
Um,
completely. Yeah, that's right.
So it doesn't have to be a conspiracy theory. It just your effect of proportionality probably explains why people make those theories more complex than necessary to explain things,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because they want to make them, bigger. But so my question is here: why do smart people and really well-educated people who are well-versed in critical thinking,
Mm-hmm.
skeptics, and I know quite a few in my field in science, believe in certain, cons like Elon Musk projects like Hyperloop or those tunnels
Yes.
in Las Vegas. I mean, those are so insanely impossible.
Yeah.
And you know, and I know personally engineers from MIT who are perfectly fine with this until you start discussing like basic physics. You see, this is physically not going to work. You cannot have a vacuum tube from here to you know, San Francisco. It's impossible.
Right. Yes. Okay. Well, so I mean, I kind of hinted at it before that you know, smart people are better at rationalizing beliefs they hold for non-smart reasons. So most of the beliefs all of us hold, we hold not because of a set of arguments that we've reasoned our way through, but we just arrive at them for whatever reason. Our peer group, our social group, our parents, our upbringing, emotionally it feels good, whatever. I mean, people don't pick political party. I mean, the research all shows now people gravitate toward the political party that they just feel best about. Like, these are my people. This is the kind. And then after the fact, they okay, so here's the, you know, set of arguments like gun control, immigration. You know, then they come up with rationalization. These are the reasons why I'm a Republican or a Democrat. And that's true across the board with religious beliefs and probably even many scientific beliefs. Although, you know, for example, I get a lot of stuff about climate science. You're on the wrong side of this, Shermer. You should be a real skeptic would be skeptical of the global warming, right? It's like, okay, and then they send me papers and whatever, and I'm not a climate scientist. I don't know what these models mean, but I do trust the system, right? That climate scientists, you know, there's thousands of them. They work independently in different labs. They work in different fields. They go to different conferences. They publish in different journals, and they all point to the same conclusion. That gives me confidence that they, and it's not an argument from authority. It's not an argument from. It's not a democracy. It's not faith. It's that I know the system works pretty well and gets it right most of the time. You know, after maybe 20 years of debate, you know, one hypothesis like the Big Bang worked out better than the steady state theory, and the evidence just accumulated, and it's like this. I don't have to know any of the science about Big Bang. I could just see what's going on. Almost everybody says this is the right one. Now, it's possible they could all be wrong. This has happened before, but it's just unlikely, right? So it's kind of a confidence in systems that work. So journalism, the criminal justice system, you know, and science, and so on. It works pretty well. You know, I remind people that pound on the New York Times. You know, well, they got this story wrong and they got that one wrong and so on. They'll list half a dozen. It's like, yeah, but they publish like 100 articles a day. You know, so there's like 1,000 a week or so, whatever. And you know, what's the base rate, right? So you're picking the bad ones. So most media gets it right most of the time. Mainstream media, most scientists are getting it right most of the time. You know, unless the science is new and it's really totally unknown, like when SARS-CoV-2 was discovered, right? So we got December 2019, January, February 2020, and you know, CDC and Fauci's making pronouncements, but they don't know. And I try to be sympathetic. You know, you're the head of the CDC or the other one. He's the head of it. And they stick a microphone in your face and they go, okay, what do we do? Now he doesn't know, but he's like, well, okay, we should not wear masks. Okay, never mind, we should wear masks. You know, whatever. And you know, nobody is omniscient, so they make these recommendations. And it's not that they were wrong; it's just they didn't know. But I do trust, like, okay, when I get this from the consensus about climate or whatever, it's probably reasonable to think it's probably what they say it is. You know, with the usual error bars, you know, by 2100 it'll be rise in heat by this, between this and this. It's probably going to be pretty close to that, right?
That's precisely the slight disagreement that you have that makes me more confident.
Yes,
that
exactly.
the science is working, right?
Right.
Like if all the labs fully agreed on everything, then yeah, that would have been suspicious.
Yeah, that would be an indication of fraud, right? So if you're trying to detect fraud in science, and you're looking at somebody's data set, and they go, oh, it's a little sloppy here and there. It's like they're all sloppy a little bit. There's going to be little errors here and there, but like in the David Baltimore case, they showed when he was doing research on trying to figure out HIV and AIDS and all that, and he was accused of fraud. And so they had this massive data set that went on for years and years, but they showed the errors were kind of random. You know, if the errors all went in one direction consistently, month after month, it'd be okay, somebody is jiggering with the numbers. But if it's random, right? So this came up in the David Irving lawsuit against Deborah Lipstadt on Holocaust denial. And Irving said, I'm not a denier, I'm just a good historian, right? So her team hired professional historians of World War II and so on to go through everything. I guess probably their grad students did this, like everything he ever wrote. And of course they found lots of errors, but you could find errors in any historian's book. But his errors all went in the one direction of exonerating Hitler and the Nazis, without exception. Okay, that's fraud, right? Or intentional lying or whatever, not random error. So that's how I take your point. I think it's a good one. And I'm always careful not to. It's not that I have faith in science, because you'll hear, science is your faith, religion is my faith, they're both faith. No, it's not faith. There's reasons, because it usually gets it right. I mean, the chances at this point of the theory of evolution being wrong are pretty low. Not impossible, but pretty low. Big Bang Theory is probably going to be robust forever, with minor tweaks here and there.
But if I can push back a little about the evolution, right?
Yeah.
So you're probably familiar with endosymbiotic theory.
Yes.
Until just a few years ago, it was called an endosymbiotic hypothesis, even though it has practically as much evidence as the general theory of evolution. And
Maybe give us a quick summary of this.
okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, so
It's all right,
our cells are composed of organelles. These are small cells inside of our cells, and they originate from bacteria. And we know that because each of those organelles, such as mitochondria, that produces ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. All these parts of the cell used to be individual species of bacteria. So every cell of yours is basically a small symbiotic community. So that's the theory. And we know that because each organelle has its own DNA, and that DNA can be tracked to the bacterial DNA, their ancestral DNA. So
it is Lynn Margulis's theory. I thought it was what did she call it?
she was
Symbiogenesis, I thought it was. She called it. Anyway, but yeah.
And the symbiotic theory.
But okay, so how is that not part of evolution? I guess natural selection is not operating in the traditional Darwinian way. Is that what you mean?
So it is horizontal evolution, right? So you don't have that feed forward kind of. But of course, I'm being slightly facetious. It's not that anything about Darwinian evolution is wrong here. The question is that why such a radically, gigantic story in our understanding of evolution has been, attacked in all textbooks until very recently. Many people claim, that's because of misogyny in science, which is probably part of the reason back, especially like in the 90s, right?
Yeah, maybe some of that. Although I knew Lynn Margulis, and we were at a conference together in the Galapagos, and she was quite the firecracker, man. She didn't take shit from anybody, and but the thing was, when she first introduced that theory, she was the only one. She didn't have that much evidence, right? So here's how I think about this: that scientists are naturally skeptical, because most new ideas that most scientists come up with are wrong. They're just spitballing ideas. They're trying this, they're trying that, and of course we pick out the ones that turn out to be right. Oh, look at that one, Galileo. Oh, okay, yeah, he was the right one. But how many people like Tycho Brahe had this modified solar system, where the planets go around the sun, but that whole thing, goes like this. And anyway, it was a kind of a modified Copernican Ptolemaic system. Well, he was wrong, and there was others like that. So I think it's reasonable for scientists to be kind of tough-minded, skeptical, like, this is all bullshit, and we're not going to, like the aqua theory. Elaine, what was her name? I forget. The theory that humans evolved in water.
Oh, yeah.
We got like this webbing between our fingers, and our nose points down. And I don't know. She had
aquatic man. Yeah.
Aquatic man. She had like a dozen different curious anatomical features that looked like we evolved in shallow bodies of water near the ocean or lakes and so on. And she had the hardest time getting attention, but she eventually did. Everybody knew who she was, but she never convinced anybody because just didn't have enough evidence for it.
Sure, but you see the difference between this and Anderson-Bieri theory is that all alternative explanation for the origin of organelles or compartments within the cell were order of magnitude more complex than her explanation, which was literally the simplest. It was, instead of evolving all these complicated parts separately, right? Why not just import the pre-existing bacterium? And her evidence was pretty strong, even though she didn't, to my knowledge, know about the circular DNA of mitochondria. Mitochondria does divide, and cellular division of mitochondria resembles bacterial division. I mean, that's a pretty appealing evidence comparing to the alternative. So you mentioned Galileo moons before. She was the one who claimed, that Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around. So the alternative explanations of the movements of Galileo moons are way more complicated.
Yes.
So it's the other way around. Right?
Yeah. Maybe another example. Back in the 90s, we covered this book called The Deep Hot Biosphere by Thomas Gold. So Thomas Gold's one of the giant scientists of the 20th century. Cornell University correctly predicted the thickness of the dust on the moon and many other theories. I mean, he was huge. Anyway, he comes out with this book in 1996, I think it was, called The Deep Hot Biosphere, in which he said, oil is not a fossil fuel. It is the byproduct of these bacteria that live in rocks. And there's, like trillions of them. And, the estimates at the time, I don't know what it is now, but that the entire biomass of the surface of the Earth is less than the biomass of this deep hot biosphere, these bacteria in the rocks. And they produce, as a byproduct, oil. And this was his explanation for why all the big oil companies weren't running out of oil. We've been hearing about peak oil since the 60s and 70s, and they just keep finding more and more oil. And his explanation is that's because the deep hot biosphere keeps replenishing these whatever you call them, tanks or whatever. Anyway, but and I remember this book was widely reviewed. New York Times, everybody covered it, and he got a couple of weeks of a lot of attention. Like, oh my God, it's Thomas Cole. Oh, he's got this. What if he's right? What if he's right? And then a bunch of geologists came out and said, okay, here are the 10 reasons he is wrong, and that was the end of it. He was wrong. I mean, and within like a couple of months, it was just off the page. No one was even talking about it. Yeah, forget it. Never mind. He's wrong. Because he's a physicist, and he comes up with a new theory. All these geologists are wrong, and I'm right. Well, if you're Thomas Gold, you get a hearing because you're a famous, respected scientist. But he's not in the field. The geologists are lying. This guy's not even remote. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. This is what we know, right? And I think that's a good example of how science works. And the cold fusion thing is another one. Right, Pons and Fleischmann hold this press conference. We got it nailed down. Here's the experiment. Before they published, before anyone could even try to replicate it. And then, of course, no one could. And that was the end of that, right? Bad science.
Yeah, their last excuse for not showing up at the conference was that the raccoon ate the cables and they couldn't get the
Right.
email.
Right. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about how the Supreme Court must deal with conspiracy theory, or it seems like it's changing in the court, that they're relying more not on hard data but on,
Like on what topics?
on abortion, for
On abortion.
example.
Well, yeah, I think it's more just politics. I mean, that was the whole point of Trump appointing 3 judges. I mean, the Republicans have been trying to do this since 1973 with Roe. They played the long game. It's like, all right, we're just going to work on getting our guys in there that'll appoint the judges we want. And it took them all that time, but they did it.
That's kind of what I meant when I used the word institutionalizing.
Yes, I think that's right. I think, yeah. I don't know if you call it a conspiracy theory. Republicans are not very secret about it. They make a big deal. We want Trump because, why would they like Trump? He's not a Republican, really. Not a traditional conservative, but he's going to get us the judges we want. That's what we want. And he did. There's nothing conspiratorially secret about that. They were pretty, Christian nationalists that are getting more prominent now, they're not secret about it. They're like, we want to change America and make it a Christian nation.
Right.
They're right up front about it.
Interesting.
Fortunately, so we know, right, what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Nick Fuentes just explained that we need dictatorship because that's the only way for us to win.
Who said that? Oh,
Nick Fuentes.
oh, yes, yeah. Well, right, I know. Yeah. So
He's a
let's
troll.
see.
So if we can close, I want to ask you, change gears a little bit, and ask you, how rewarding was it for you to have your work put out there in the public sphere? You're known nationally, but this is pretty much ingestible for everyone to read.
I think so. Yes. Well, all my books are for what are called third culture books. So C.P. Snow's Two Cultures. The literary people and then everybody else, and there's this gap between there. And in science writing, it's always been, well, there's the technical professional scientists doing their writing, and then there's the popularizers. Oh, that's just pop science. Well, there's something in between there. It's called third culture books. That is books that are for everybody, including the professional scientists and the lay public. You can just take Darwin's On the Origin of Species. Anybody can read it. It's very readable. It's well written. Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel that won the Pulitzer Prize, that's not the pop version of the technical theory. It's the only version there is, and anybody can read it and understand it, right? Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene, game changer, right? This changed the way scientists, biologists in particular, think about genes and so forth. But that's not the pop version. It's the only version there is, and that's my model, right? So any scholar, scientists that study conspiracies will get some value out of this, but anybody can pick it up. It's not rocket science.
Well, thank you, Michael Shermer, for coming to talk
Thank
to
you.
us.
Thanks for having me. Nice to support our local bookstore here. There aren't many independents left.